Welcome to this week's Who the Folk podcast. I'm Lonnie Goldsmith, the editor of TC Jewfolk, and today we talk with Elisia Cohen, who is the director of the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communications at the University of Minnesota, and, more importantly perhaps, one of the new members of the board at Jewfolk. We talked to Elisia about educating the next wave of journalists, why she found a niche in health reporting, and how good journalism can make a difference in the 24-hour news cycle we live in this week's Who the Folk podcast. Elisia, welcome to the podcast, and thanks for joining us this week.
Thanks for having me.
So you've been in town for a couple of years now. You're the director of the Hubbard School of Journalism and Mass Communications. I got that right?
That's correct. I'm director of the school, and I was hired after a national search about 22 months ago or so. Yeah.
Okay. And you had spent a lot of time both as a student and then as a professional in Kentucky at the University of Louisville, right? Or were you at the University of Kentucky?
I was at the University of Kentucky for 10 years and was at St. Louis University before that. Yeah.
So what's been the biggest adjustment as we sit in February and I'm sitting in a backyard? I'm staring at a backyard full of snow to the mix of life from the relatively southern life of Kentucky.
Well, I'm not gonna lie. The 3 feet of snow has been an issue. It's funny, when we were in St. Louis, we had a corner house, and we have a corner house here, and we swore we wouldn't buy one, but for different reasons. And here we're in a quiet neighborhood, and it's a quiet street that's up the side, so we don't have that issue that we had in St. Louis. But the snow, my husband gets out early every morning to dig out the corner sidewalk so the kids could get on the school bus. And that's we now have different stories about winter living than we ever imagined we would have. No, but I think it's the University of Minnesota is a really large university to work for, and the Twin Cities has a very large Jewish community. I've lived in Los Angeles previously, but I would say that this is probably the largest Jewish community that I've been a part of in my adult life. The congregations are all large. People have lived in Minnesota for most all of their lives. And so being a transplant, it's been interesting. I've connected with a lot of other people who have transplanted or their spouses are transplants. And I think that's how we've been able to engage a little bit more. But yeah.
And I know both my wife and I are transplants, and I bring that up a lot on the podcast only because I think this is a great community that does tend to draw people from other cities that don't necessarily want the mega city kind of experience. Mm-hmm. So I think there's a lot there.
Right. We definitely deliberately, I was looking nationally at a variety of different opportunities. My daughter's in elementary school, and so I definitely was thinking about moving from Lexington, Kentucky before she entered middle school. And so when we were thinking about where to live, the Twin Cities definitely had appeal for the community and for all of the arts and entertainment that's present. We love big cities, but we also wanted a really livable city, and it's been I actually have a more reasonable commute, although, as you know, I live in Plymouth, and that's about a 30-minute commute without traffic to the U than I did in Kentucky when I lived 5 miles away from my workplace. So that's been a really wonderful thing about the Twin Cities. It's been really nice.
So being in academia, was that route what you had always been interested in as a student once you chose the mass communications path, or did you do sort of the maybe more traditional journalist, route first?
No, I was really interested in research and writing. I thought I would end up going to law school, but then I had a couple professors who talked to me about graduate school, and it just seemed like a fit. That is, the idea of teaching students that were college students was something that really interested me when I was in my early 20s, and I tried it out. I transferred as an undergraduate. I was at the University of Iowa before I went back home to the University of Louisville. And because I had that experience, I guess I really wasn't I wasn't worried about failing. That is, I went to a master's program at Wake Forest University and kind of tried out a master's program in speech communication. I coached the debate team there. And then I went out to Southern California for my PhD. And I really figured that if I didn't like the doctoral program work, that I would be in one of the largest media cities in the country. And then I would just find a job and it would be okay. And so I was a bit fearless about that, but I really was passionate about looking at problems in media and communication and everyday life. And I ended up doing a lot of research in the area. Then 9/11 happened. And so I did some research around how people turned to media after 9/11. And then I really got tired of kind of political communication and moved more of my research into the area of media and health, which is where I stayed for a while when I took my first and second job. I did a lot of research related to how we talk and communicate about cancer risks. And so that just led from one thing to another. And I never thought I would really be in academic administration either, but I think that one of the things that attracted to me about being a teacher is similar to why I'm leading a school, is that I enjoy working with young faculty, and kind of helping them develop their career talents too, and thinking strategically about the future of journalism and communication from a school like the Hubbard School was just a really attractive opportunity. And so that drew me here.
I know that I've talked to either interns we've had or younger writers that we've worked with, and I always tell them that my journalism school experience, I graduated 22 years ago, basically pre-internet for the most part, at least pre-web, newspaper websites that were any good, and certainly no social media, is a very different experience than it is now. What, given how different it is and how it's evolved, how do you see sort of the future, not just of journalism, but how we train the next wave of journalists, especially in this 24-hour media world that we live in?
Well, I think the principles of journalism education haven't changed. That is, it is a profession with certain professional standards and norms and kind of ethical guidelines. However, when we are training students for the jobs of the future, we're also training students really more broadly in other major programs in our school in areas like content management, strategic communication, not just the old-fashioned advertising or public relations, but thinking about how most of our students have a variety of multimedia production skills. So they're both broadly trained in the liberal arts and critical thinking and thinking about problems related to media and information management, but they're also well skilled as creators and content developers. And so that's the kind of challenge, is to challenge to train students for where the puck, to use a hockey metaphor, is going rather than where it's going in the past. And so I think that our field does that fairly well. I think this generation of students is very entrepreneurial and nimble, and this generation definitely are digital natives. So because of that, they think in those terms.
See, and you're adapting to the North just fine with your hockey metaphors and everything. Look at you go.
Right. The Minnesota students definitely are big help, as are my colleagues for sure.
So you talked about earlier about sort of transitioning into health and the media and doing a lot of research in that. Was there something, particular, either in your past or familial, that maybe led you down that as a area that you wanted to sort of become expert in?
I think that I've always been fairly cause motivated, or chosen projects where I think I can improve the reach and impact of communication. And I think that intellectually studying the politics of the war on terror, there wasn't a point for academic intervention there. And the same problems around community and how variables that affect our politics also affect our health. So our relationship with family members, our kind of ideology, our relation, where we grew up, where we lived, the schools we attended. And so what drew me to health was really an opportunity. When I was in St. Louis, I really missed some of the large scale projects that I had been working on in Los Angeles related to media and community. And the Centers for the National Institutes for Health funded a very large initiative to fund Centers for Excellence in Cancer Communication Research. And there was a faculty member there, his name is Matt Kruder, who is an excellent communication scientist who was studying this phenomenon. I was a new faculty member right out of my doctoral program. And I thought, this is really great. He's interested in problems of media and community, but as it relates to health. Disparities in the community, because, for example, if we are always communicating with groups of people in the same way, but some group is not reached by that message, if we continue on that path, that information inequality will continue. So it really takes more targeted and tailored communication approaches to level, to kind of bring people up to speed, to improve the information environment. And so he was doing that in medically underserved communities. And then when I moved to Kentucky, I picked that up. And instead of working in an urban community environment, I spent a lot of time working in Appalachia, Kentucky, which has some of the challenges, I would say, as the Iron Range in Minnesota, of kind of geographic isolation, distance from healthcare providers, a built environment that's more challenging for individuals, and also sometimes lack of information or reach of targeted communication efforts that you get more of in terms of dosage in an urban environment.
So one of the other things that you're doing now that you're settled into Minnesota, you are one of our new board members at Jewfolk. What is it that got you interested in wanting to be involved in our nonprofit media company in this way?
Sure. Well, I think that I spend most of my hours that I'm not with my family doing things that are related to my employers and that are kind of outreach related. And so, one has to pick and choose what you get involved with because I can't do it all. But I've tried to be a part of nonprofit boards in the community. I'm on one that's called the Sahan Journal for New Immigrant and Somali News. And I also am president of the board of directors for the National Scholastic Press Association. So I've been involved in a variety of different nonprofits, and I thought that this is one in terms of it relates to the Jewish community and media that I'm a part of and that I read and pay attention to. I also know that the Mamalas and Libby were just really helpful to me as a newcomer when I transitioned. And so I think that Twin Cities Jewfolk does play that role. And as someone who hires people and who attracts people to the Twin Cities, and some of those people are Jewish as well, I just think that it's a really nice and valuable resource and so I view that as a way to pay it forward.
Well, we're lucky to have your expertise on the board, so thank you for that. And the last couple questions, I know you were slammed today, and we're going to get you on with your day. Your favorite Jewish holiday?
Oh, my favorite Jewish holiday? To think about that. Probably Rosh Hashanah, to be honest. The New Year, I usually make brisket. My daughter loves apples. She doesn't really like honey, which is kind of funny. And we usually get together with friends, and I really enjoy it.
And favorite Jewish food?
Jewish food. My potato pancakes, latkes, are probably best in my family. I'm known for them, so I would probably say latkes would be my favorite Jewish food.
Is it family recipe passed down, or something you've just sort of picked up and played with over the years?
Yeah, no, my Nana was known for her latkes, and so I have my Nana's latke recipe. I make it once, maybe twice a year for everyone, and outside of my grandmother's hamantash and cookies, that's probably my Jewish closest to my Jewish roots with food.
Well, excellent. Well, Elisia Cohen, thank you very much for joining this week. We appreciate having you on.
All right, thanks. I will talk to you later.
Thank you again to Elisia for joining us this week. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, rate, and review the podcast. You can find us on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, SoundCloud, Spotify, and others. If you have any suggestions of people you think would be a great interview on the podcast, please send them to me at editor@tcjewfolk.com. Thank you again for listening, and we will see you next week.